At one point, Galveston was among the top richest cities in the United States. It was even nicknamed the Wall Street of the South and the Queen of the Gulf, thriving with banking and retail. All of that was wiped away during the nation's deadliest natural disaster still on record, the storm of 1900. Investors were encouraged to move inland to Houston, changing the trajectory of both cities. As we come up on the 125th anniversary of the Great Storm, historian Mister McKinney shares details of how this catastrophe shifted history and the lessons that we learn, which is one of the reasons why you really focus in on history. And I think it's important for all of us to learn as much history as we can, because it really can dictate what happens to you in the future.
Absolutely. We can learn so much from the past, and we learned a lot from the hurricane of 1900. It really kind of changed how we treat storms like this, and then also the public also treated storms the same way.
Yeah.
We took it seriously.
All right, let's back up to before the storm. 1890s, as I mentioned earlier, Galveston was the gem of Texas. Houston was just literally a backdrop.
Absolutely. So Galveston had a larger population, but only about 2,000 people according to the 1890 census. So it wasn't that it was Houston wasn't anything. It had lots of rail. Galveston had the port, though. They were closer to the bay. They had the port, and they had a lot of activity. But you're right. The millionaires all lined up and down Broadway Street, for example.
You can still see glimpses of that today when you see those big, beautiful old homes, the ones that survived.
Absolutely.
The millionaire mansions there, right?
And the government was actually funneling people into the interior of the country. You'd see that with the Ellis Island of the South, for example. They were getting people to go to New Orleans and to Houston and Galveston, rather, to come in to populate the interior of the country. So immigration was a big deal for that area, and that's what these folks, and that's from the 1870s all the way to 1890s.
Yeah, we think about Ellis Island a lot, but that's the reason why kind of the foundation of Houston being so diverse is because we had more people come from around the world through Galveston. Ellis Island was mostly Europe, right?
Yeah.
And then you had Asia and Africa and all come through Galveston along with Europeans. All right, Houston was the worker town. Again, we mentioned, Galveston, one of the first in the U.S. to have electric street lights. You saw that wealth and that progression there.
Absolutely. And and then as you mentioned, the hurricane comes and just changes everything for Galveston.
Yeah. All right. We have a talk of a seawall. That thing called the seawall that we all know about today, but a lot of people might not know the purpose of it. Galveston, only about 9 feet above sea level?
Yeah, in the center of it too. What you had before and why the seawall was actually discussed as early as the 1890s was because of a really important hurricane that happened in 1886 in Indianola that wiped out that town in the Matagorda County area. So you had multiple hurricanes, 1896, 1886, that Galveston didn't learn from, actually.
Yeah.
So they were talking about a seawall, but never actually implemented it, and they realized that obviously that was something that was needed.
Right. And it was interesting because the bright minds of the day were like they felt an intense hurricane could not strike the island like that. But you just mentioned you got a warning before, and then some people said it's simply an absurd delusion. Right. All right. According to the memoirs of Isaac Klein, he says that he rode along the beach warning people of an incoming storm. This, of course, is one of those things that you understand as a historian. You have to go back and look, was this really true, or did somebody else say this?
The Paul Revere aspect, right? Yeah. No, he and his brother Joseph worked for the weather system over here. They came from Tennessee originally, and he had some reservations about this. They were looking at this. In fact, it was such a massive storm, it blew off a lot of the weather equipment during this, and it makes landfall.
The weather equipment of the day. There was no Doppler radar.
Yeah, exactly. No radio, no newscasts. I mean, telegraph was something that you were able to communicate with, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. All right. The storm rolls in that day. Landfall September 8th through the 9th.
8 p.m.
Nothing like it ever before. 140 mile per hour winds, 16-foot storm surge. There we go. Over the seawall, right?
And that's what does it too. I mean, people, they drown from the salt water, and it also devastates all this massive. If you think of a box of popsicle sticks thrown on the ground, that's what Galveston looked like. There was a bunch of twigs everywhere, and the city didn't know if they were going to rebuild or not. And they got help. They got help from important people. We have photographs, for example, and videos. Thomas Edison sent his camera, this brand new invention, and the earliest photographs moving pictures that we have of the area are from Thomas Edison. They're part of the Library of Congress. The public can go online and look out. Yeah,
that's amazing. I remember talking to the grandkids of people who survived the storm. They said their grandparents had written down in diaries and things. And we oftentimes hear that 6,000 people lost their lives. And she said her grandfather told her, no, we stopped counting at 6,000. And after that, if you imagine, where do you put those people, the deceased people? It just got so overwhelming.
It captured the world's attention. I mean, Clara Barton with the American Red Cross, for example, sent some help as well. These books that I have right over here, these were actually fundraising tools. They were sold door to door in certain cities to showcase the devastation of the hurricane.
Because again, as you mentioned, you didn't have the mass media before to show you.
You didn't, and people were just enthralled. They were like, when you saw the visual imagery of what happened, they were like, this couldn't be, this is something out of a movie. movie or out of a play.
Yeah, one of the women shared with me, she said her grandfather said they were in one of those beautiful old mansions that survived. She said they were on the second floor, or the top floor, and they were plucking people from the water as they would float by to save their lives. They said the wind sounded like 1,000 little devils shrieking and whistling.
Yeah. I mean, again, we only have about 8,000, 6,000 bodies recovered, but you've got about 12,000 people that were missing. And to this day, as you mentioned earlier, it is the largest natural disaster in U.S. history.
And you mentioned all those stories. The St. Mary's Orphans Asylum was one. You had 93 children and 10 nuns disappear. And one of the things that they had done was, let's tie everyone together so that we can stay together and not get lost while they all perish together, right?
Exactly. There were 3 survivors. Those 3 young men that survived were able to tell the stories of that as well. They were the older of the 93 children, and they were able to tell their tales. All
right, so here we come. Now we have a shift in the major port city. Investors were encouraging people to move inland, and the inland was Houston proper.
Houston's population increases by 30,000 people, according to the next census as well. So you see there's a lot more focus and energy, a much safer bet to actually build in Houston. And it's at the same time, too, that the petrochemical industry is also kind of thriving. So we're realizing that 60 miles inland is a much safer bet for Houston. But it also lets Galveston know we need to get serious about protecting our city. So from 1901 to 1907, they start to work on getting the seawall built. But they do something else besides just the seawall, because the seawall was wonderful for protection. They understand that's the front line. But what are we going to do once the water goes over? And that is where a massive engineering feat that took place. And of course, the seawall was recently recognized, too, with a really cool milestone I'm sure we'll talk about as well. But you can see the engineering aspect that took place in this, too. They went over to the Netherlands and really looked at what they were doing at how to control dams and waters, because they've been doing it for centuries before that. And they realized that they needed to raise the city. And this is a pretty significant challenge for all the residents of South Texas and Galveston as well. So here they are raising the city over 17 feet in many areas, as much as 22 feet in the middle of the city too. Now it sits higher up, but that's because if the water goes over the seawall, it's then going to drown the people on the other side. So they're lifting over 2,000 homes, and they're making the city basically above grade, even higher.
Yeah. And one of the other lessons learned is they have an Atlantic hurricane warning system. That became one of the big things, right? So the warning office was established in New Orleans at first for the Gulf after the storm of 1900, moved to Washington, D.C. in 1902, and then from there just saying that, and of course we see what today, we have the warning systems. And every time we have a new storm, we learn something different. We've gone over this before over and over again. How do you get out? How do you evacuate? Who should evacuate? All those different things.
And the communication is key too. It's about letting the public know this is happening. These are the consequences if we don't listen to those scenarios. So we've learned from history from that aspect.
Yeah. All right. So let's come back around to preserving our past. That's the other part, and this is part of that preservation right here. These books that you have, and encouraging people to go look at the artifacts and things that we have left. This is the proof of what happened, and again to learn from it.
The Rosenberg Library is great. There's 2 museums in Galveston you can go to as well. But what I love about Galveston, Texas, is they really understand heritage tourism. They've saved so much of their courtesy of George Mitchell and folks like that back in the 80s and 70s and 90s, saving some of this history. So there are individuals and folks out there that are doing that. We do tours of Galveston as well on board the Houston
Which, by the way,
bus.
that's why that little bus there, the history bus right there. So that history bus, you started this several years ago because you realized that we pass by buildings every day, street names every day, whatever it is, with no knowledge of it. And then you become, I think, much more interested and invested in your community when you know how it got there.
Absolutely.
People came before you, right?
When you can see it, when you can be engulfed in history, when it's all around you, you learn. Everyone learns differently, and you learn, I think, better when you have that aspect and that kind of emerging experience.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I'll get a phone call and they go, "Guess where we are?" I'm like, "We're Mister McKinney's bus," right? And they're sharing, but they will always remember the stories that you shared, and you do all kinds of different things throughout the year. Obviously, around this time of year is when the storm of 1900 came, the anniversary of that. But you'll do things around the holidays. You do things around International Women's Month and the key women in Houston.
It's women's history. We do Hispanic history for the month of September to October 15th, for example. So we're always on board the bus teaching tales and Houston history stories, including Galveston. We've got a LaPorte tour coming up in September, and we'll talk about that history as well. And then saving history is important to me, too. Making sure that we save the structures that I get to talk about on board the bus.
Because Houston was real big at knocking them down.
Unlike Galveston, they didn't keep a lot of their history. We tore it, and a lot of it's because we progressed so quickly, whereas Galveston slowed down in some of their growth because of the hurricane and other factors. We thrived, and we're a city of the future, so we're tearing things down. down. And for that reason, so much of our history is gone, so we like to make sure we talk about it.
And you're on the front lines of that. You're part of the Friends of the River Oaks Theater. It recently helped to save that space. It is now reopened, and it's amazing.
Oh yeah, under the leadership of Maureen McNamara, Michelle Mower, we're working on a new fight though. It's been something recently. Jason Miles covered it over on KHOU News, so we're so grateful for that coverage. And yeah, it's the Granada Theater, this beautiful 1949 theater that has a sister theater, the Pasadena Theater, that's called Capitan on 225, and it's in jeopardy of being demolished. And it's right there on East Jensen, the Jensen corridor in the East Jensen area, and the community wants to save this building, make it an art house or make it a nonprofit hub that people can go there. So the community is behind this effort. We hope that Houstonians can also get behind it. artintheheart.org/Granada is where you get more information. Ronnie and her husband are working really hard to save it as well, so they're leading the effort actually.
It's one of those things that creates community. All right, I'm going to go back into history, back into time. How did you get started in this? I love history. I think a lot of people do, but how did you get started in making it your livelihood?
It's absolutely architecture. That to me, in the built environment, learning about Houston history from that aspect is what I really thrive on, and I've been so blessed to work with the commercial and residential real estate community. They're the ones that also enjoy learning about the history as well. But I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the board of the Friends of the Julie Addison Library's Houston History Research Center, and we've got a massive collection that's all free to the public to go to the Houston History Research Center at the Julie Addison Library, look things up. The building is 99 years old. We're turning 100 next year, so learn about Houston history on your own as well. Follow and like Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston. Come join us on board the bus.
Yeah, all right. Mr. McKinney, thank you very much. For more details on Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston and various events or additional information on the 1900 Galveston Hurricane, visit greatdayhouston.com for links. More Great Day after the break.